you guys ever heard, are any of you district office people? Okay. Sometimes it's referred to as the White House in our district in Boone County. We're in a very large county. Are you guys familiar with Boone County schools? Okay, we serve a 20+ population of students.
100,000 plus.
And we have 12 or 13.
13 elementary.
13 elementary schools.
Soon to be 14.
Yeah.
Next year we will open our 14th.
Yes.
And 5 middle, 4 highs.
Yeah, so we are a very big district. We serve a lot of kids. We serve all the way from total Title I schools to schools that have a very below 10% free and reduced lunch. So we have a very diverse population within our county itself. And so I'm going to let Renee kind of talk a little bit about the president, what we're going to do. The way that we present is we kind of jump back and forth between.
It's very informal.
Yeah,
so speak up if we say something that sparks an idea or a question. You know, we like the conversation.
Yes, yes. So we are very informal. If you have a question, you want to stop us, ask us to clarify something, we're more than happy to do that.
Okay. So, and I don't know, I wasn't listening to her, but I'm Renee Turner, instructional coach too. And I don't know if she told you about the instructional coach role in Boone County, because it does sound strange that an instructional coach will be the one talking to you about curriculum. But in our district, because we do try to keep a slim central office, there aren't curriculum people. So our job is for 4 days a week, we are planted in a school and we work with teachers in the school as a coach. But then 1 day a week we're pulled to central office to be the curriculum people for the district. And it kind of is tied back to when we used to be called curriculum consultants, and they rolled us over into instructional coaches based on some work they did at Harvard, and that was just a job change. But they didn't take away any responsibilities from the curriculum consultant job. They just added the instructional coach piece to it. So that's, we kind of do two things. Okay, so what we did was we started, Boone County decided they wanted to be first. I don't know why, but we wanted to kind of lead the way. Kentucky, as you know, was the first state to adopt the Common Core standards. So we knew that going in. Our former commissioner had been helping lead the group nationally that came up with the new standards. And so Boone County, the year of the writing of the standards and things, we were taking a very active role in trying to keep up with every draft. So every draft that was released, and some not technically released, but our superintendent could get her hands on, we were looking at and trying to make sure we were on the right track for preparing for what was coming. We did have teachers that were from our district that went to the state level and were on the state team to help write the standards. And I think most states did that sort of thing, I would assume. That at some state level they had some people looking at them because the states would provide feedback. And then, as you know, something you probably went on and saw yourself, I think it was March, April of that year, they opened them up for everyone to see, and you could go online and give your feedback. So these were created by educators. You know, while they are national standards, they're not by the government kind of standards. They were created by educators with input from teachers. And it was select teachers and then opened up to all teachers.
Right, it was kind of interesting too, because this is the year that I actually served with the state. And so being part of Frankfurt that year, there were a lot of times when I would be at a meeting in Frankfurt where we would have the drafts pass across our path of sight just to get some input. And we actually had the opportunity to talk to some of the people who were in charge of the committees of the teachers that were creating the new Common Core. And it was really interesting at that time because one of the things that I was very excited about, even though I was outside of Boone County at that time, was one of the biggest changes in the Common Core from program of studies was that it used to be primary was all chunked together. So you had a primary set of standards, and it was kind of a free-for-all in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade of who was going to be responsible for what. We tried to level that out, but it never actually was done very well. And so what we had was we had a lot of repeated instruction, kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. And in some instances, that was absolutely fine because of the rigor of what it was they were doing. And then there were other times when it was really kind of a waste of time for what kids were doing over and over and over.
And then things were skipped.
Yes.
You know, you might get something not at the rigor it should have been because one grade level touched on it for a small portion of time. And the other thing is we're site-based schools, so we have a site-based committee at every school that determines these things for the school. And so in our district, at that time we had 10 elementary schools. Those 10 elementary schools could have adopted completely different timelines. And we have a 40% transient rate within our district. So as a district, it really didn't work well for us because we had you know, what could have been taught at one school in second grade was a first grade curriculum in another school, was a third grade in another school. When you've got 40% of your kids moving within your district, it's, you know, it was setting us up for failure is what it was doing.
Right, and the transient rate that's an issue for us now as a nation. It's no longer are we serving children in our classroom that will be with us when they enter preschool or kindergarten and exit with us at 5th grade. We can pretty much count on 40% of those students revolving through our school system. So as an educator, it helps give us a sense of accomplishment, a sense of security, and a sense of purpose, knowing that if what my kid's doing in Kentucky and they have to leave and go to Ohio, they're going to pick up right where they are and have the same standards and the same type of instruction to meet those standards. So I think it's helping us prepare our nation, as well as the students within our district of Boone County, so that kids aren't being lost in the shuffle of the types of lives that they lead nowadays, because that's just our society. You know, we no longer serve the household where the father works the same job and retires from the same company. That exists very rarely now. And so it's a disservice to our kids for us not to pick those pieces up in education and work with the reality of that.
And it's not just lower socioeconomic problem either, because if the dad or the mom, either one, stay with the job, that usually means transferring. And to get the promotion or to go on to the next level, you know, most people in business, they have to move. So that means the kids are moving too. Right, to the next.
Yeah. So anyway, at 9 and 10, the instructional coaches, curriculum consultants had all this. It was very overwhelming to us on our level, because it all looked, even though it wasn't all brand new, it all looked brand new because of the formatting and the changes with the primary.
And every time they came out with a draft, it was in a different format. Because I still love the second draft better than what they released. It was much easier to read. So yeah, it was messy. And what our district decided is that they wanted the teachers trained on these at the end of the year. And what happens in our district is, if there are snow days, then we get PD days at the end of the year, because the teachers have to make up the snow days, the kids don't. So if there are snow days, we get teacher time, you know, and to do PD, and the teachers hate it, and it's painful to do, but it's worth the effort. You know, I complain about it the whole time we're doing it, but I know it's worth it. So it is, you know, this year we don't have it. We didn't have a snow day, which is like first in history, so we don't have it. I went to the county schools, and we always had snow days. So this is the first time this has not happened for us. So we don't have this PD. But what we normally do is have these days at the end of the year that teachers come in. And the charge was given to us in the LSS department that we wanted the teachers trained on the new standards. And we wanted them deconstructed. The assistant superintendent wanted them deconstructed, and she wanted vocabulary, essential vocabulary pulled out, and a way to assess kind of thing. We called it a demonstrator, but it was like one question that wraps it up. So the coaches were given, we were given a room and given a month to get it done. Well, it was about 3 weeks. To get we made them into cards. Her vision was to have this half a card where the front and the back had all this information, and they were tied to the college readiness standards. So we had to show where that was tied in. It was middle all the way, K to 12. So we created the cards and then pulled the teachers in. But what happened is we were working off of the final, what they said was the final draft, and then the actual product was going to come out. And we got these assurances from our State Department. I was one of the reps that would go to a state level meeting every month. And I kept asking, and the assistant superintendent kept asking, how close are these? Because we're spending a lot of time. And they told us 99%. It's just going to be formatting. It's going to be typos. Don't worry. Well, they were completely different. So they were released on June 2nd. Our training started June 3rd. But we did pull teachers in, and we all stayed up almost all night long the night before, getting the training pieces to the new standards. So we had the teachers go by grade level. And in our district, that means I did the kindergarten group, and there were about 120 kindergarten teachers in one place. So every grade level had between 100 and 150 teachers for 2 days. And we worked through the ELA standards on the first day and the math standards on the second day. We went through format, we went through how, what all is in there, because there are some things that if you just pick up the packet and you're a teacher, you're probably going to skip. So we made sure we hit on the practice standards for mathematics, the appendix A and B for ELA that are very important, There's a couple of documents that are attached for students with disabilities, ELL students, how to approach the standards from those point of views. So we made sure we made them aware of all those things. We had them help us deconstruct some standards so they could see. We had them create a card, even though all the cards were made, we didn't give them to them until the end. So we had them go through the process of deconstructing it and pulling out the vocabulary and coming up with a demonstrator and finding the title of the college readiness standards so that they knew what went into the cards, and then we gave them the cards so that they could just use them. And that was 2 long days, but the charge was from the superintendent and the assistant superintendent went around and visited every site that we had going on and pretty much told them, we want you using these next year. And of course, the pushback was, well, are our assessments changing to them? No, they're not. But what the superintendent said is, we don't care. The assessments will have to change. We want our kids ready, and the only way to get them ready is to start. So let it go. Well, that was very, very hard for teachers to do. They couldn't let go of what those scores were going to look like. And I kept hearing, but they print our scores in the paper. I know, but if you're teaching these more rigorous standards, then surely they can do what we used to be asking them to do. And some bought in and some didn't, but the charge was given to them that they should be using these new standards that first year. They weren't assessed on them. This will be our first year of assessing the new standards. So.
Yeah. And the one thing that happened during this time, and I do have to say I was lucky I was not part of that whole from the coming out on the 2nd, the
Yeah.
3rd, I was still working for the state, so I didn't have that. I just had to clean up during the summer piece. But teachers had to be immersed in the standards. That was the piece that was the most valuable. Even if they really didn't even do anything with them that next year, they had heard them, they had been gone over. The teachers were getting a vision for what it was they were now going to be responsible for. And some teachers did get very nervous. We did have teachers retire.
Yes.
We had teachers make a choice that this was no longer this is not the wheel they wanted to be on anymore. Because you guys know in education, there's a continuing wheel. It will never stop. And what you're hearing us talk about, the work that we've done is massive because there's a massive change for curriculum with the new Common Core, but it will never stop. This is an ongoing working type of document for teachers, and it should be. It should never be finished because we live in a world where every day we're learning something new. So if we're not addressing our standards and changing our instructional strategies and what we're teaching our kids, then we're not keeping up, again, with what's going on in the classroom and in the real world.
Move on to the next time period. How many of you are working in a school that is using the new standards full-fledged at this point? But you're all in Ohio, right? I think, didn't you say they're all in Ohio? And you adopted them in the state, so I'm sure you will be getting them. So this is just saying that they're expected to plan with them. What the district did at this time, you know, the teachers knew they were expected to, some jumped in, some didn't. Well, maybe I'll start with what the state did. What the state did was decide that they would create these regional groups, and I think they divided the state into 5 regions. And they asked for 1 teacher rep from each level, meaning elementary, middle, and high, 1 principal rep from each level, and 1 district office rep from each level. And they put these groups together. So they would pull the district office personnel together, and it was, for us, it was directors and assistant superintendents that went. And they would talk about the new standards and how they're going to deconstruct them. The principals, they would kind of talk about the same thing. Now, those 2 groups were more informational groups. Then the teacher group was to actually deconstruct the standards and put them into learning targets for the teachers. The problem with that, as you can probably see in our district, I mean, it works out great for a district like Walton Verona or Erling or Ellesmere because you have 1 or 2 elementary schools, 1 middle, 1 high. But for a district our size, to pick 1 teacher rep from 13 schools, how's that teacher, their charge was to be the leader then and come back and train the other teachers. You can't do that. So that turned into then a coach, you know, part of our curriculum. So I was the rep for math, and we have another rep that was for the ELA. And we go to these monthly meetings, and we were to deconstruct the standards. We spent all year last year deconstructing the standards. We were all assigned different ones. And every region did all the standards. So then they took, like if I deconstructed 1st grade geometry, which is what I think I did, then they took that back and compared it to the other districts and put our work together and turned it out, and that's now on KDE. so you can access that. I think it's open, I don't think it's put in a password or anything, so you would be able to get to that from the State Department. And that work was good, I think. I could see for the districts that hadn't jumped in like we had, that it was kind of like what we had done with our teachers in June for them. But it was drawn out, it was at a slower pace, which for some of our teachers, they would prefer that slower pace and having more time between. Some of our teachers I have to run to stay ahead of them because they are dying to be, making sure they're doing the most new thing, the best thing. So, it's just, with that many teachers, you can't make everybody happy. Yeah.
So when you're talking about the Common Core, you're talking about math and the English.
Yeah.
What did you do with the other departments?
Science and social studies, the science is coming this year. So those, and science and social studies have an ELA component now. So they got trained in those. So you're talking middle high, they went to a training on how to use their new standards, which was a huge shift for them. Neither of us work with the middle or high, but we work with the coaches. The coaching staff is one big staff, so we work with them. But oh wow, the middle and high school teachers with those ELA standards, that was brand new. That wasn't something they were comfortable with.
What standards are those? Like the
Literacy
reading?
and writing.
English language arts, so it's
Okay.
speaking, listening,
So like the
observing, reading,
nonfiction and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, so there's a big chunk of writing standards. I know I've worked with my husband, he in high school stuff, and so on the writing in social studies, because it's a big chunk of standards that now they are expected to teach. And high schools are handling it differently. I know of one high school that what they do is the social studies teacher and the English teacher just trade off every so often. He'll say, my kids need to write, a five-piece paragraph or whatever essay thing that was a little iffy on, but that's what he said he wanted to do. So what he did is he switched with the English teacher. He went over and taught them a social studies topic, let the English teacher come in and teach the ELA standard, which is one way to get, good quality. Probably a better way would be doing it together, so they could both be learning from each other. But
yeah. And one of the things that I have heard, because my husband's actually a middle school science teacher, so he's anxious for his standards to be out, which hopefully next month we'll look at, unless that's changed.
I think next month they're open for
for review for the first time. So science is coming next month and they'll be reviewed. But the one thing that he said with the new, especially the English language arts, because that everybody owns that. That's one of the philosophies in the county is every teacher, regardless of what grade you're in or what you teach, every teacher is a teacher of reading. And that's been a very big push for our superintendent and for our instructional coaches. And he said that he had a conversation with one of the high school science teachers who was on a block schedule, so they finished their end of course assessments, which you guys are you doing that this year or will you pick that up next year? The new end of course.
Well, that would be Kentucky.
2014.
Okay, when you pick that up, so we're feeling that pain right now, and the one thing that the teachers could say about that is the rigor of the English language arts pieces that they had to pick up in their science content area is what saved them on their end of course assessment. It wasn't their content, it was the ability to be able to read their content and be able to write about their content. So I thought that was very...
Well, that makes sense with
yeah.
ACT, because in the science ACT, it's not about what you bring to it, it's about how you can digest what's in front of you. So,
We're going through at our high school. We're going through a process where we're looking at Ohio released the revised standards. I think this is the first year that they released them. So our social studies department is looking at the English language arts literacy and writing standards, and from all of our teachers, and they've been very supportive of the changes and the addition of the ELA. And especially our AP teachers, because our AP teachers are looking at those standards as a roadmap for how kids become prepared for AP level work. So it's been fantastic. There's a huge change. I think somebody mentioned in here there's a huge change in emphasis on primary documents as opposed to in place of anything else. So they've been I shouldn't say surprising, but they've been very supportive of the ELA incorporation in social studies.
Good.
that is very good, because I think we felt some pushback from some of our concept people.
Oh, yeah, definitely, and rightfully so. I mean, if they weren't saying anything at all, I'd be much more worried. If there was quiet in this whole, because the thing with the program of studies, at least in elementary and middle school, a lot of people float below the radar.
Well, middle school used to be in Kentucky the same way that primary was, where it was all mixed together. So you had your 6, 7, 8 math standards all together, and middle schools were supposed to decide. So that same problem we felt in primary, they felt in middle school.
School. And so it was, the blame game was very big in Boone County a lot of times when the test scores came out. Well, it was because sixth grade's problem because they didn't do it, seventh grade's problem because they didn't do it, eighth grade's problem. You know, you guys, I'm sure you play the same games in Ohio that we do with that kind of thing. But this takes a piece of that out. It's not there anymore.
Can I have you guys talk about kind of the deconstruction process? Like the unpacking of the standards? My understanding of the, you know, most of them are with high school, but I'm thinking of the model curriculum. It's been good. So I'm thinking of the, at least at the high school level, it's broken down. I think you have theme, topic, content statement. So whenever you're unpacking, you're deconstructing. Are you deconstructing the content statement?
Well, we're just deconstructing the actual standard, and so that's what we call it, but I'm guessing it's the same thing as the content statement. Because what you'll have in, like the mathematics, you'll have algebraic thinking, and then you'll have a subtitle under that, and then you'll have the standard, and you have to deconstruct that standard under that. So that's why I'm guessing it's that, it's the third thing down.
So are you, along with the deconstruction, so you're just kind of brainstorming all the different topics within that statement. Are you developing proficiency scales with each standard?
Well, we took a little bit different stance in Boone County than the state. It's kind of a theme, but we really felt strongly about sticking to the verbs in the standard. So we didn't change the wording of the standard so much. What we did when we broke it apart is if there was multiple verbs or multiple representations, so we might break those apart to make sure you hit everything that was in there. But we didn't change that verb. But what we did do is go back, because I think we're going to say this on the bottom of the card, and look to see what would have been prior to that standard in the previous grade level or somewhere within that grade level. And then put that on the bottom, and then what comes next, so that if a kid was ready to go on what comes next. The problem we ran into when we started kind of saying, okay, here's what the standard is saying to do, and to be able to do this, you have to be able to know A, B, C, and D. Well, A, B, C, and D is probably in the previous grade level. So you don't need to write a learning target for your classroom that is on a grade level standard below yours, is how we take it.
Yeah.
Now, the state did a little different, because they went ahead and put some of those A, B, C's, and D's on there as skill standards instead of, or, you know, understand. Yeah. So we didn't do that in Boone County. We kind of pushed our teachers to do that because the program of studies had been written in a way that we had to do the whole pulling apart. It was a really messy, very wordy document. These standards are much slimmer to us. They are something that's really much easier to understand.
And so the one thing that we did for teachers that I think was probably the most valuable for them was we created the learning target standard. So if you had a math standard that really had within it 3 things that had to be hit in order to master, there might have been 6 I can statements in order to master that one standard. But I do think it's important that all the teachers went through the process of deconstructing, and we use Rick Stiggins' work as who we follow on how he deconstructed standards. That's pretty much was our format for how we did that. So we went through his deconstructing.
Stiggins, S-T-I-G-G.
Yeah, he's he's one of the gurus, but his was, I felt like, more classroom real than some of the other things that were out there. Some of the other things kept it up here, and what we wanted was we wanted to bring it into the classroom so the teacher could look at the standard and see the face of their student, not just the content, but the whole kid.
Yeah, we just were very cautious about not changing any of the words from the standard. We use the actual words of the standards because of that whole thing. You would find that in a previous standard.
Yeah, and here's an example of a big paradigm shift for us. Main idea was not as big as key detail to support main idea. So that was a big paradigm shift, and it still is for some of our teachers. Using that language in front of our kids, go back into the text and find not the main idea, but the key detail that supports the main idea. And so those kinds of things are what we found, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that the deconstructed piece, it gave them the vocabulary, it gave them the snapshot of, if I were going to assess the standard, what might that look like? And those need work. Those aren't perfect by any means.
Now that we've lived with them 2 years.
Yeah, we're like, wait a minute, that doesn't do what we thought it was going to do. But the I can statements, the teachers automatically will go to that, and that's the piece that they feel like they can understand because it's kid language. It's no longer all of that language that they get, but it takes a lot longer to wrap your brain around it versus one thing.
Okay. Okay, and the other thing we did, this has been big, this has been a 2-year thing, is that we pulled a district team together. So each school was able to send 1 teacher per grade level. And we had to break it up and do primary K through 2 in the morning, and then 3 to 5, and then 6 to 8 on another day. And high school is done on they're done by content areas.
So this is something that the district invested money, because these were release days for teachers. It was not on their own time, it was on work time. That they were coming together and they were writing the English language arts assessments for different units. And we use commoncore.org's units. Have you guys looked at Common Core? Okay, it was a free site when it first came out. You can still get to the free maps if you do commoncore.org/free. You can still get those for free. They have since gone into publication and now they cost money.
$20, I think, a year for a subscription.
Yeah.
Which is not a lot, but I don't think you get a lot more. We bought a subscription just to make sure we weren't missing out on something. I don't think there was a lot more with it, so it's kind of just worth the /free unless you.
So what that gave our teachers was the format for how they were going to roll out. So each unit, there's 6 units for each grade level. And it took the standards in ELA and broke them down into the units. And then they have an appendix that's called focus standards, so that you know as a teacher, SON standards, especially in English language arts, you're going to teach them all year. But there is a time of the year that you're held accountable for assessing it for mastering. And so that's why it was called a focus standard at that time, because this is when you needed to assess it. And so we took that framework along with what they recommended as their, what kind of text was it called? The recommended text?
Oh, Appendix B.
Appendix B.
Exemplar text.
Exemplar text. So we looked at those. That was a very, very dynamic change. You know, we have 5th grade teachers using Alice in Wonderland for the first time instructionally. It was very interesting to see.
With 1st grade reading Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Because that's what's recommended in the new standards.
Yeah, because it's all based on Lexile. So everything in there's got research behind it. So that's been very hard, and we still are getting pushback.
Oh yes, every
Big
day.
pushback
I had it
on
today
that.
at lunch.
Yeah. So those teachers come together. So we have 13 kindergarten teachers, 13 1st grade teachers. They come together and work with our assessment director, and the coach, instructional coaches, and our director, and we work on creating assessments to assess those units. And that has been a tremendous amount of work, but I think well worth it.
It's been about, yeah. So when you're looking to do this, if you're at the district level, this model worked really well, because what we did is for half a day, we came in, we looked at the assessment they had just given and kind of went through and took the stance of, since we wrote these questions, we need to make sure they're okay. So if 60 to 80% of the kids don't get them correct, then they're not probably a good question. So we could mark that one down as one that needs revision. So we took time to do that, and then we modeled a lesson on a new standard. And that was done by our district assessment coordinator. And those were powerful, because she did the Alice in Wonderland lesson, and she used pieces of artwork for kindergarten and 1st grade. And just seeing, the high level of thinking that she was asking them to do as we're sitting and doing the Alice in Wonderland, and the teachers are having to really think to answer the questions she's asking, because we acted like we were the kids in the lesson while she did it. And that has helped. And then we give them another assessment, and they go back and they give that assessment. We meet back in like 6 weeks and go over it again. And that cycle has gone on for 2 years now. And we are still behind. We have not given Unit 5, and we've got testing starting the week after next. Yeah,
so we're not, this isn't by any means perfect, but I can give you a very real example of a teacher who came to me. They just gave Unit 4 right after spring break, and their data was due to me by today, so of course I got a lot of it today, because they've only had since after spring break, but they all came, and the one teacher handed it to me, and she said, I need you to come in and model how you teach kids the difference between alliteration and metaphors. She's like, look how they did on the multiple choice. She had a question. It was a very good question. It is the rigor of our ELA assessments are no longer, there's not a distractor in there anymore. It's correctish, 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 and correct.
And that's been big.
That's been very big, because that's ACT.
Well, the one I had the argument with today, not argument, but pushback, I guess, at lunch today was from Charlotte's Web. And the sentence in Charlotte's Web says that there was dew on the grass and the earth smelled like fresh spring. And so in that line, what does the word earth mean? And the choices were grass means the grass, it means the planet, earth, or it means the dirt, or the ground. And the teachers weren't buying that it wasn't earth, that it wasn't the planet. that Earth met planet in that sentence. So it, yeah, I know you're shaking your head going.
Oh.
I agree with you.
Sorry.
They got it wrong. This is second grade, and I had 2 teachers that got it wrong themselves.
That's hard.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
That's what you're saying.
You get what I'm saying? But it's correct. Like I would have thought, like to me, it is the dirt.
Yeah.
It's the dirt. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about planets, you know, that's not what the author is talking about. And if I had just read through that and not asked that question of a second grader, I would have thought they got it. Now that we've asked it, you know, most of the teachers knew what it was, but I had 2 teachers that didn't. So then there's the content of the teacher knowledge is having to be, we're doing PD on content knowledge as well as PD on teaching strategies and pedagogy all at the same time, because these standards are so rigorous that it really has to all be going through. And that's why we have teachers retiring and get freaked out.
So we do, and this is an ongoing thing, and so the teachers give the test, we collect the data, we put it all together, it all goes into a big bank, we analyze it, and then we come back and we look at the question. Like Renee said, if 60% of 4th graders in Boone County missed it, that's probably not a good question. Then we can go in and we can look and see, was it just do we have too much of a correctish answer? Because sometimes it really was.
Right.
A kid could argue this validly as being the right answer, and so we'd have to change it. But that's the kind of discussion that teachers are having versus at the beginning of this work, they were arguing over what books they were going to use. So it's gotten down to the discussions on the standard and teaching towards the mastery of the standards versus worrying about no longer being able to use Gina B. Jones as a text to teach from.
So you were using the commoncore.org for assessment items?
No.
They don't have assessment.
We were using them for their actual units of study.
So what do you use as kind of because my understanding of the math, at least the math that I'm more familiar with, the type of assessment compared to an ACT or even our past AGT/OAs, much different.
We were using the Explore.
Explore ACT model. Our district assessment coordinator has written for ACT before, so she is all in on the ACT stuff. And so those are the models that's how we kind of frame our questions, but we haven't done math yet.
Yeah,
Math is coming next year. We have focused all of our district work on ELA. The math things that happened, we had this go on. We had a few years, I don't know, what was it, when Everyday Math came to our district?
9 years ago.
7, okay, it was 9 years ago. When it came, it was kind of earth-shattering for our people because it was a good rigorous program. And it kind of bumped up our math instruction and opened their eyes to some best practices in math, but it was all in the program. And so what they did is they bought into the program and not into the best practices of mathematics and learned the program and not the best practices necessarily. So when the new standards came, they didn't exactly match. Everyday Math didn't really match up that well, and so it had everybody panic. So what most of our elementary schools did is go to find a program that helped them. They were still more bought into the program part. So we did, the slide,
Yes, it did.
we did,
And this is why, and what she was saying is the reason why we did this was because we found in math in elementary, now I'm not going to speak for Melville High on this because that is.
I think they found the same thing, that they solved it different.
Okay, they solved it different than we did. Was we found as teachers were starting to get into the new Common Core math standards, they didn't know the content. It wasn't just that it was new, it was that they had never understood fractions and they'd never had to teach fractions, so it was never an issue, or it was always the last unit after testing. Those kinds of things were rising to the top. It was very messy at first, but through a lot of good, I think, instructional conversation with our teachers, we started, all of us, even instructional coaches, started owning up, we've got to figure out what this looks like altogether. This is no longer about you don't know what you're doing. That's not what it is anymore. It's about, okay, how do you instruct fractions? And that just happens to be a big area for us in Boone County. How do you instruct fractions if you don't understand fractions? How do you possibly teach a child how to conceptually understand fractions if you yourself do not conceptually understand fractions? And so Renee and I, through a lot of brainstorming, we found that it wasn't just the content standards that were our issues. It was the practice standards, which were huge for us. So
They're very important. When you get the new standards, do not skip.
Don't skip your 8 practice standards.
The 8
they
practice
are
standards.
absolutely critical to being able to teach students conceptual understandings in math.
And how many PDs have we done? And every time we do one, we make them take those 3 paragraphs. The practice standards are listed 1 through 8, and then there's 3 paragraphs after them, and then the real content standards start. And there's those 3 paragraphs will really change the way you see the standards and how those math standards are supposed to work together between practice and content. So every time we do a PD, we pull them out. And I mean, this one lady, she comes to, we do optional PDs, so PD academies, and she comes every year. She's been in mine every year that I've done them. And she's always fun, and she's one of our better teachers in the district. She's, you know, a district leader, a teacher. She, you know, she's someone that's well respected. And this year, she said, "Oh, now I get it." And it's like, oh, finally. We use it every time, but that's very important. But what I think our middle and high schools did, what saved them from the problem we were having in elementary, is the Gates math stuff. So Bill and Linda Gates Foundation that does different grants and things. We got a grant. We were one of the people selected in Kentucky where they came in and did really just change the way high school math and middle school math is taught through their PD. And they do things called FALs, which are formative assessment lessons. And these FALs have really changed the way math teachers see their math lessons. And they're really
really
awesome.
good.
They are. So if you get a chance to see any of that work, I would jump on that too.
So anyway, at the end of last school year, the previous school year, we actually had a 2-day training on math standards, along with some of the response to intervention work. Are you guys doing RTI? Is that a piece of what you're doing? Because one of the things that you will find out in curriculum when you guys start really getting into this is you'll have to go through and create a gap map. Meaning that something that used to belong to 4th grade might now belong to 2nd grade or 3rd grade. And so those kids that are moving, or kindergarten, we do have something like that or something like that. So you're going to have to help your teachers figure out what, in addition to their standards, are they going to have to teach until a certain time frame when the gap should close. And for some of our kids, that's not until
It was 4 years out, right?
4 years out.
So we created a map for them to be able to look at and take standard by standard that says, okay, it used to be in 5th grade, now it's in kindergarten, so that means until this year, you have to teach it in 5th grade, because they won't have gotten it, they will miss it. They were 1st grader this year in 2nd. So
for example, fractions, since that's the one that I brought up before, we had 5th graders this year who we had to go back and start at the beginning of 3rd grade fraction unit because they had not had the instruction that 3rd grade now has in fractions. So fraction unit had to be quite a bit larger, which they've done it, but we've done a lot of work through. We have plus times in our day where we have extra reading time and extra math time. We've used our extra math time to help close some of those gaps. And I know not all schools design their school days like that.
we didn't have that, so we just had to be creative. We had we have science as a special, and so we had our science lab teacher teach the measurement and data math units within her science lab, because that was an easy tie-in to a science content.
So how are we doing on time?
6:30.
6:30, 10 minutes. We're almost done. So in this school year, the teachers were expected to use those units that we talked about. We've had some pushback, but because we are a site-based decision-making district where every building has a site-based council that decides what goes on, that there were some councils that chose to adopt just the timeline, which would be my school. And then there are some schools that chose to adopt the entire units. So like at my school, the district adopted the units. So the district curriculum might be saying that we're going to teach a unit on heroes. Well, my school is teaching those standards, but maybe not in that with heroes as the theme and without the books that they're recommending in that unit, because all we adopted was the timeline. So that's been a little bit messy, but we're getting around it. The assessments were created, like we said, in that whole, the assessments we got through one assessment all of last year. But that tells you how slow it is to create an assessment. We did those monthly meetings, and well, they're not monthly, they're every other month. And it took us a whole year to create one assessment. This year, we've created 5, we're doing 6 tomorrow. So we will have an assessment for every unit, but it's the one.
This is the one piece that I would highly recommend if you are in your school is in any way responsible for purchasing resources along with the Common Core. Spend time in the standards before you make decisions on that. Don't get caught up in trying necessarily having to get a program per se, because number one, you'll waste a lot of your money. And the whole, there's a lot of discussion out there right now that this national, or, I read your guys' article, your innovation You know, we don't want to do that. We don't want to take that innovation out of Boone County. We have some very creative, some very talented individuals in our schools, and we don't want to take away their ownership of teaching. That is never our purpose in any of this. And sometimes I feel like we have this, we've gone through this whole cycle about, well, if everybody's in the same reading series, that's going to solve our problem. So everybody in Boone County, 7 of the 13 schools adopted Scott Forsman. I would say 60% of Scott Forsman's stuff is not even anywhere near close to
Well, I know, I was gonna say, I know, I'm first grade, because my first grade really loves their Scott Forsman, they wanna give it up. So when we did get these funds, every school was given money from the district to this year, now not last year, which I think was very smart of our superintendent, because we would have jumped before we really knew them. So he gave them this year, and he gave them, and then he gave a deadline to spend them, and it had to be tied to the new standards. So they wanted to just get, Scott Forsman's is selling the how to use our program with the Common Core standards thing, which I think most people are doing now. Now, Everyday Math gave it to us, but Scott Forsman sold it to us for $160 a teacher. And we got that, and basically what it showed is that for a whole year, there are some literature standards that are never hit in any of their things in first grade. But the foundational skills that are part of the ELA, they're hit like crazy. So it was eye-opening to my teachers because they do love their program, and it is good for foundational skills, and first grade is more about foundational skills. So I don't want to take that away from them. But as we were doing these units, they kept pushing back and saying, we just want to use Scott Forsman, we just want to use Scott Forsman. Now they see they need to combine. They need to do some things from the unit because they're not hitting those literature standards and those nonfiction standards by using Scott Forsman, even though Scott Forsman will sell you this package for $160. That tells you.
Graciously sold.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so for the last few minutes, does anybody have any questions for us?
Well, the other thing that,
I'm sorry.
let's just say this, because this is what Janine, this is why she brought us in, I think, because of the half day I did with the teachers. She said, hey, why don't you come and talk about what you just did with the teachers? So part of that money that we got from the district, we set aside as PD money, and we were able to pay for subs for the teachers to spend. Her school did it for a full day, 2 half days separated. Mine only was able to do it for a half a day. So they got a half a day to spend with me, and we went through the new materials that we had ordered, and went through how to use them, and looked at the standards again a little bit more to see how they meshed with it. We did that whole matching up with the Scott Forsman in first grade. Each grade level was tailored to the materials they bought and the needs they had at that time. And we did it in the principal's office, which wasn't where we intended to do it, but it wound up being really, really good. Because then she could hear what they were hearing, and she could jump in on the conversations, and it made us all on the same page. It was fun afternoons. They looked forward to it, but there was a lot of learning going on, and a lot of planning, and a lot of talking about how we're bumping these things up, and how can we use this, that kind of thing. So that's how we got it down to the teacher level of materials.
Yeah. And I think, in all honesty, 2 of the pieces of materials that we gave our teachers for standards, which is going to sound really corny, is we actually took the standards and had them put on cardstock. And so they have a ring with the standards on it. They love those. You would think they were magical. We have a placemat that's about this big, laminated. English language arts is on one side, math is on the other side. It fits perfectly. So if any of you would like those downloads so that you could actually, because we did the cards from Home Depot, or not Home Depot. We didn't go to the what's the office?
Staples.
No, Office Depot. Office Depot has on, and I'll be more than happy to share them, it's all formatted, so you don't have, because that was the nightmare getting it formatted. And also the placemat format.
Yeah,
So
KDE made the placemats, so they're probably on KDE, but we can give them to you.
yeah, so, and that is just, I have teachers that have highlight tape on them. I have teachers that are using dry erase markers when they're on them. It keeps them immersed in the standards. That's what you have to do. If all they ever do is look at it one time and never ever go back to it, then it's going to end up just like program studies, which in our county, a lot of teachers didn't even know what the program studies were. If you talked about POS, they were like, what is that important? I'm like, well, yeah, that's what you're supposed to be teaching. It's the law. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit important. But our teachers in Boone County, when you say Common Core standards, they all know what you're talking about.
So. Yeah. So we're like, I call us the annoying gnats, because we just keep flying around talking about them, and they think they're done, and they want to shoo us away. But every time we do it, it makes them a little better. And as I'm getting shooed away, I just have to remember that.
And we worked really, we have a very strong format for reading instruction and a very strong format for math instruction. So we have a framework that's in place. We do a lot of Marzano work. I don't know if Mrs. Del Monte's talked to you about Dr. Robert Marzano's work for instructional strategies. His 41 key strategies are the foundation behind everything that we do in Boone County. So it's not just about what's on those standards, it's about how we teach our teachers how to teach the standards to the kids. So
It's a definite mix of pedagogy and content. All right, any more comments, questions?
I have a question, because next year, I know, like, our kindergarten is doing Common Core this year, but 1 and 2, we're gonna do the old indicators and the new Common Core. Did you go through any transition years where you're doing both?
Some of our schools did last year. They held on to both, and actually one of my grade levels did because they couldn't let it go. But they found it hard to juggle the two.
it's overwhelming to the teachers because they think it's going to be good because they think that they've got their comfort there, but the comfort becomes a burden very quickly as they get immersed in the new standards.
Yeah, and it's our district mapping timeline that, like, we have red, you're old, yellow, you're the transition, then green, you're full on. So, like, we're transition next year for 1 and 2, and then the year after that, we're full on Common Core.
Wow.
But it just feels like it's a ton of standards, like.
That would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, for us, there weren't many that matched. Now, our state did, I feel like, a PR job and put out a document that said how they matched. But when we sat down and looked at it, because
It's a stretch.
it was a
Might
stretch.
have the same common word in it, but
Yeah.
there was not.
So when you really look at the new standards and look at the rigor and what they're really asking the kids to understand, you know, you think about those math standards, they have to demonstrate an understanding of what a fraction is, not just be able to tell you numerator or denominator. And that's in 3rd grade. They have to really understand. And then in 5th grade, they have to understand multiplying fractions that you multiply the reciprocal, and they can't know the process. They have to understand why it works and be able to explain it. So that's just so different, that when you go to maximum up, I think it's gonna be difficult. If it were me giving you
It's
advice, which I
doable, but
can't,
just no, yeah.
I would go with the new because it's harder. And I would think some of your old would be in there that you'd be hitting just to get them up to the new. And that's kind of what we told our teachers.
So do you think, like, the board office thinking, I mean, it makes me wonder why we're gonna do both of them, like, after listening to you, it doesn't
probably-
make sense.
Well, to our teachers, it probably would have been what some of them wanted, was a more slow approach. Because we just went all in, K through 12, you're doing it, that was it. Now, to our teachers, they were going, but why can't I use some of my older? Why can't I do, because of the comfort level? So I might take it as a year that I get to teach my old, and every once in a while pull in a new. Like, pick a standard for the month and say, this month I'm gonna really understand the standard and I'm gonna pull it in. And kind of put yourself on a timeline like that, if that's what your district, do you think that's what you do?
Yeah, I think I mean, we were just one of the very first ones to jump on the bandwagon, but we did have a lot of support. And I do believe 100, I mean, that's how I attach it. When Randy posted, I don't care about the assessment.
Yeah.
I mean, for a superintendent to say those words was pretty big. You know, we took them at face value. We said, you know what, it's about good instruction. And if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, it doesn't matter what assessment they're gonna get these kids. They're gonna do okay on it. So, and then they'll just continue to do better.
And that was last year, so, or was that this year?
That was last year.
That was last year.
So did your test score reflect that?
Well, the test last year was on the old standards.
Yeah, it was the-
And we did fine, we did okay. I mean, we didn't really change.
Okay, so that's what I was, yeah, so you weren't teaching the old
We were-
standards, the new ones.
We
That's
did
kind of
really
where we are
good.
now, the OGT is around indefinite, I mean, 2014 is the year, but apparently new legislation has to be passed for it to go, I don't, I sat through a meeting and I like didn't understand half what they were saying, but, I mean, we want to start rolling them out, because we've been doing PD the past year, and that's interesting, because a lot of my teachers are like, well, the OGT and the OA, we need to kind of, but they're very similar, just more rigorous, so it could be done.
Yeah, and I don't know the old Ohio standards at all, so I can't tell you how closely they'll match. I know that in Kentucky they did match at all. So.
Social studies wise, they match pretty well, actually. Their 7th grade's different, I mean, I'm a 7-12 campus, so 7th grade's different, but the rest of them, the rigor's higher, I believe, but the actual standards are not.
And I don't know that the National Social Studies has come out yet, and they do, you know, but I don't know, I have to think that they were joking, but when I was told, no, they'll be the last to come out because we can't get people to agree on who won the Civil War. So, and when you think about history is so much based on perspective, you know, then I can see, well, we're gonna have some disagreements about maybe some things when you think nationally, but, yeah. So I think science is supposed to come this year, and I guess social studies will follow. The last we were told is it was going to follow pretty closely. That it was coming pretty soon, maybe the end of this year, but that comment was made to me 2 years ago, and it was made a couple times by a couple different people, so.